talk about dying grace. Dying grace. We need grace to live, but we also need grace to die. Death is a subject that we don't like talking about, isn't it? However, the best time to talk about it is before it happens to a loved one or even yourself, for your loved ones to grapple with. The best time to talk about it is now. And as Jesus followers, we have a different perspective. And I want to remind us of that today because it's a date, an appointment that all of us must keep. I've asked two of our widows if they would share a portion of their story with us today. Let's listen.
Did you and your spouse ever talk about dying and what you would want to be remembered for?
Yes, we had. And because by profession, I'm a planner and my personality type. So I would bring it up often, but he would never talk about the subject. What's ironic is 2 days before he passed away, I brought up retiring and what should I do in the event of our death? And his response was, surprise me. What was so amazing, although he always joked about it when I brought it up, when he passed, everything was organized. Down to the housekeeper, the person who would take care of the lawn, even upgrading the security cameras, and even purchasing a metal door. And for years, I had asked him to put a flashlight in the car and jumper cables, because I'm dating myself now, because in the event my car wouldn't start, and he thought that was so jovial. When he passed away, I found a brand new, up-to-date jumper cable starter and a flashlight with an antenna. So I can always have a compass to know where I am, because I'm directionally challenged.
Wow, so he had it all planned out.
He had it all planned out.
Wow, how special and how comforting that must have been.
Yes, it has been.
So how about you and Bob?
We never discussed it. Even when Bob was in the hospital for the third time and we both knew he probably was never going to come home. Well, first of all, it was during the pandemic.
I know.
And I couldn't even be up in the hospital with him.
Oh my.
So the day before he passed away, they finally let me go up and see him. And I got up there and I just panicked and I thought, what do I do?
Yeah.
Because we'd never discussed anything. I guess we had no plans to die. I mean,
Oh, well, you were busy living, I guess, but still.
yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah,
Wow.
it was a shock.
So today's message will remind us of the perspective that Jesus followers ought to have. I want you to consider today's message like clothes in the closet. Have you ever gone and bought winter clothes in the summer? I do that because I get great bargains. I don't need them that summer, but I know I'm going to need them for the winter. And sometimes sermons are that way. They don't always apply to me right now, but keep on living, and you'll pull it out of the closet when you need it. And so let's delve into this subject of dying grace and store this one away if you don't need it until you do on another day. The Apostle Paul gives us this perspective in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He writes, God raised the Lord Jesus from death, and we know, keep that word in mind, we know that he will also raise us up with Jesus. That is why we never give up. Our physical body is becoming older and weaker, but our spirit inside us is made new every day. We have small troubles for a while right now, but these troubles are helping us gain an eternal glory. And that eternal glory is much greater than our troubles. So we think about what we cannot see, not what we see. What we see lasts only a short time, and what we cannot see will last forever. So here's a sermon in a sentence. God is perfect, therefore his timing is perfect. I want you to put a comma, even in death. God is perfect. And if God is perfect, therefore his timing is perfect, even in death. And so when we talk about dying grace, we have to remember it is God the Father who determines the time, the place, and the manner of our death. I repeat that. It is God the Father who determines the time, the place, and the manner of our death. And just like we need grace to live, we need grace to die. Grace is favor. Grace is strength that God gives us to live. We also need it to die. Mercy is leveling the playing field. Grace puts us over the top. Let me say it another way. They asked a little boy about 9 years old in Sunday school the difference between mercy and grace. And he said it this way: mercy is the bread. Grace is the butter and the jam. I like that. We can live with just bread, can't we? But butter and jam provides extra flavor. And so that's what grace is. Grace is God's favor, and it is God's strength for us to not only survive, but to thrive through the ups and downs, the highs and lows, the ebbs and flows of life, so that we have an inexplicable peace in times of difficulty. So we need grace to live, and we need grace to die. And there are various graces that we live by every day. The first is common grace. Common grace is what God gives. He gives favor to the atheist, to the agnostic, to the religious, to the irreligious. He gives common grace to everybody. He lets the sun shine on the just and the unjust. He lets it rain on the righteous and the evil, Jesus said. That's common grace. But the other graces belong particularly to those who are Jesus followers. We live a different kind of way. We have saving grace or salvation grace. That's when we surrender to the lordship of Jesus Christ. He gives us a new dimension of thinking. He gives us a new power to live life above the common. That's saving grace. And then he gives us something else. He gives us daily grace or sustaining grace. Daily grace or sustaining grace gets us through life. He gives us food and clothing, and he gives us shelter. He gives us job, transportation, all of those creature comforts that we take for granted until they are taken away. He gives us sustaining grace to live. And then he gives us growing grace. He doesn't want us to remain as spiritual infants. He wants us to grow in grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ, because there are certain benefits that we cannot access if we stay a spiritual infant. So he gives us growing grace. And then he gives us something else. He gives us sufficient suffering grace. Sufficient suffering grace. Sufficient suffering grace gives us that ability as we're going through tough times in life. Many of our families with developmental disabilities understand suffering grace better than most. When you have a debilitating disease, something that changes your life course forever, God will give us suffering, sufficient suffering grace to get through it. And then he gives us dying grace. Dying grace. Let me define it this way. Dying grace is three things. It's living without undue fear or anxiety about death. I don't have undue fear or panic about death. All of us have some fear because death is mysterious. There is the unknown. But it's not undue fear. It's not paralyzing fear. So living without undue fear. And here's the second thing about dying grace. Dying grace allows us to live with no regrets. That is, with no no paralyzing regrets about mistakes that we have made in the past. I have to recognize that God's grace overrides the mistakes I've made in the past and not let them paralyze me from living the life that I have to live from this point on. So dying grace allows me to live without regrets, without mistakes that I've made in the past. He says to me, Rufus, you have to admit it when you made a mistake, forget it, and then you have to move it. You have to keep living from this point on. And then it's enjoying a godly life on this earth through the suffering and successes. It's not paralyzing me. It's not polarizing me. It's from this point on, how am I going to live the way God wants me to live for the time that he gives me on this earth? We need grace to live. We need grace to die. And so here are three things the apostle says, and then I'll take my seat before we have a closing song. Dying grace begins with knowing something. It begins with knowing something that many others do not know. Knowing something that many others do not know. That's dying grace. The Apostle Paul writes it this way. God raised the Lord Jesus from death, and we what? Wake up the person next to you. And we what? We know that he will also raise us with Jesus. We know this. That is, we never give up. That's why we never give up. Our physical body is becoming older and weaker, but our spirit inside us is made new every day. This Greek word for know is order. It means intuitive knowledge. It means to know for certain. It means an assurance. It means I know that I know. It means I know beyond a shadow of a doubt. That's what order is. So Paul says the reason that you and I can experience dying grace while we're living is because we know that God raised Jesus from the dead, and he will do the same for us. I know that, and it changes my perspective about death. Let me give you an example. Young man, I'm pointing at you. Do you see me? That beautiful blue shirt. Will you stand? Yeah, the one who looked back. Beautiful. Can you give us your name? Anthony. Anthony, are you alive? Yes, sir. Anthony said he is alive. Anthony, are you sure you're alive? He said he's fairly certain. Anthony, can I convince you that you're dead right now? He said, I don't think so. Are you sure you're not dead? He says, yeah, I'm sure that I'm not dead. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. You are alive, Anthony. You know what Anthony had? Order. He knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that he's alive. He's not dead. He's for certain. And that's what Paul says to us. We as Jesus followers, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God raised Jesus from the dead, and one day he would do the same for us. It changes the way we live life. Here's a verse in Ecclesiastes 7 we don't talk a lot about. The verse reads this way. The day one dies is worse than the day he is born. Did I misread that? Isn't that counterintuitive? Listen, the day one dies is better than the day he is born. It is better to spend your time at funerals than at festivals. For you are going to die, and it's a good thing to think about it while you still have time. Isn't that counterintuitive for us? It's counterintuitive for us because we think that when a person is born, there's a lot of celebration, and it should be. But when people die, there also should be. It's important in dying grace for us to not only understand fun, but we have to also understand funerals, because God allows us to live looking at another perspective. This world is not our home. We need dying grace. Let's take a look or listen to what these two ladies have to say further.
So, we are talking about the subject of death, which can be an unpleasant topic. I know Ken's death was pretty sudden and unexpected. Would you mind sharing, like, what happened?
His sister calls. They enjoyed going to different restaurants, and she decided to surprise him with a new pizza. And he was not answering. And I said, he's home, he's on the porch, he's watching Netflix. So the phone is just not working. She calls me back, and she said he's not answering the door. I gave her the garage code, and then she called me back very emotional and said to get home. And when I got home, of course I couldn't see him, and that's when I heard about his passing.
Oh, wow. I'm so sorry. So unexpected that was for you. So how about you? Can you tell me how?
Well,
I know
Bob,
it was less sudden for you.
It was.
But still sounded fast
Bob
to
had
me.
been in the hospital the previous year with pneumonia. And he'd been going back for checkups, and they just said, oh, it's scar tissue. And finally, the 1st of December, they decided to do a scan or biopsy.
Yeah.
And he came home that day and he said, I have lung cancer. And this was right before Christmas. So we went to Greensboro to be with our daughters at Christmas, and we told them. And he came back first part of January, went to the doctor. And the doctor said, you're a great candidate for surgery. We'll remove part of the lung, and you'll be fine.
Wow.
So he went in for surgery, had part of his right lung removed. The next weekend, we had a small group at our house, and he was going gangbusters. 2 weeks later, he went in for a checkup, and they said, oh, your lungs collapsed. So they put him back in the hospital. He was in about a week that time. He came home for a couple of weeks and then ended up going back into the hospital, and he was there 3 weeks the last time. So from the 1st of December until the 16th of April.
And that's when he passed. And you did get to be with him.
I did, the last 36 hours.
Wow.
Dying grace does something else. It allows us not to just suffer through misery, but convert suffering into blessing. I want you to think about that. Dying grace does not just allow us to suffer through misery, just to get through it as if it's purposeless, but to convert it, reverse it into blessing. Here is how the apostle says, we have small troubles for a while right now, but these troubles are helping us gain an eternal glory. That eternal glory is much greater than our troubles. So we think about what we cannot see and not what we see. For what we see only lasts a short while, and what we cannot see will last forever. There is a way for suffering to be converted into blessing. It's much like a mother giving birth to a child. I've known many women that give birth, including my own wife. And when she said, this is a long, laborious 9 months, I don't think I want to do this again. And then the baby was born, and she said, well, maybe. And then a long, laborious 9 months, and then the second baby was born. I don't think I want to do this again. And then maybe. And then a third child was born. Long, laborious labor. I don't think I'm going to do it again. And then the baby was born. You know what that is? That's converting suffering into blessing. It's the blessing of whatever happened before you began to see the benefits, and then you go through it again. Dying grace allows us the ability, gives us the ability to convert suffering to blessing. It gives us a different perspective. Not that we want to go through it, but it gives us a different perspective. Here's what the apostle said. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and a day adrift at sea. I have traveled on many long journeys. I faced danger from rivers, from robbers, from my own people, the Jews, as well as the Gentiles. I faced dangers in the city. I faced dangers in the deserts and on the seas. I have faced dangers from men who claim to be believers but are not. I have worked hard and long, enduring sleepless nights. I have been hungry and thirsty and often gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep warm. Then, besides all this, I have the daily burden of my concern for all the churches. But you know what? He viewed that suffering as blessing. Not just a misery to just get through, but how do you convert that suffering to blessing? When you have that divine perspective, it makes a whole lot of difference when it comes to suffering for blessing. And so dying grace, living without undue fear, living without regrets or mistakes of the past, and enjoying your life from this moment on, God gives us that as we look toward that day when this world will no longer be our home. And then here's the third thing, and then I'll go to my seat and I'll ask the choir to give us a final song. Dying grace believes that we are moving from a flimsy tent to a permanent building. I like that. We're moving from a flimsy tent to a permanent building. Here's how the apostle says it. For we what? We know, that's that word again, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that when this earthly tent we live in is taken down, that is when we die, and we leave this earthly body, we will have a house in heaven, an eternal body made for us by God himself and not by human hands. We grow weary in this present body, and we long to put on our heavenly body like new clothing. How many of you know we live in a flimsy tent? I do. The old folks used to say there's a leak in this old building, and my soul has got to move. If you don't believe you're in a flimsy tent, keep on living. And one day you'll experience hair loss. When I came to Hope 14 years ago, I was young, handsome, tall, black, and had a head full of hair. And today I'm black. Because the body is decaying. The body is aging. If you don't believe I had hair, there's a history wall in the back behind the connection station. You can see that. And some of you have hair color changes. You know what you do. Because the body is aging and we are decaying day by day. I get aches and pains that I can't explain because the body is aging. We live in a flimsy tent, but one day God is going to give us a permanent building because there's a leak in this old building, and my soul has got to move. Let's hear a final word from Ann and Diane.
Tell me how your Hope family comforted you and provided for you during that time.
Well, when I got up to the hospital, first of all, and I realized, he's not going to make it, the first thing I did was call Jeff Roach. I said, Jeff, what do I do? Yeah. I had not even thought. We had no funeral plans, nothing planned, and so Jeff took over.
That's wonderful.
We ended up, a friend of mine from work arranged with Hope to have a drive-by memorial service.
Right in the middle of COVID.
Right in the middle of COVID. And I do have one friend in Hope who has texted me every single day since Bob died. To this day, she texted me this morning, 7 o'clock every morning I get a text, just a short text that says, hey, what are you doing today? Good morning, have a great day.
And how many years has that been?
4.5.
Do you have a Bible verse that has strengthened you during this time?
The one that I have really clung to is, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or discouraged. The Lord your God will go with you.
Yeah.
Joshua 1:9. I posted it on my wall shortly after Bob died, and it's still there.
Still there. How about you, Ann?
I've always focused on God's promises and His faithfulness. And so I tend to read multiple scriptures, and they all remind me of the faithfulness and then trials of some of the great prophets and how He delivered them from them all. I lean on those scriptures to get me through a specific situation. And then one that I'll finally end with in Luke, where He reminds them that He even cares about the hair on our head. And that means a lot. So He's even concerned about us in that way.
Would you be able to share one word of encouragement just from your perspective and that you could give to us as the congregation?
I'd say grab a hold of God and just hang on. He's going to get you through it. I don't know where people would be or how they get through things like this, not having a relationship with God, because He's there for me.
Yeah. How about you?
I completely agree with Diane. And then also I would add, some advice that was given to me by our illustrious pastor, senior pastor, Rufus Smith. He said healthy distractions are great. And a healthy distraction can be a work activity, a volunteer activity, serving on a nonprofit board, and most importantly, work on becoming the best you.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful.
Let's appreciably applaud the Lord for these two sharing a painful period in their lives. I have walked with both of them through this season, and I appreciate how God has brought them through. They have experienced dying grace. You are not alone, whatever you're going through here.
Thanks for joining us today. We love to pray for you and celebrate alongside you. Please share anything going on in your life with us at hopechurchmemphis.com/prayer and subscribe to the Hope Church Memphis YouTube channel to experience previous worship services and more. Have a great week.